This is the Tuesday workshop from Thinker Business Accelerator Community. I'm Jason Todd, my friend and colleague Paul Edwards. Today, we're following up on last week's conversation, which were a series of questions that business owners should be able to go through to, I think, refine who they are as a business and how to set themselves apart, which then I think yields results in terms of direction, momentum in that direction. And so, Paul, you were bringing this forward last week, and you wanted to continue this week. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I found, pardon me, I found it very helpful to do this exercise, and then when you and I began to riff on it, I was like, "This is good. We could play a lot of pickleball with this, so to speak, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth." And as a matter of fact, we did. Once we finished the episode last week, we realized we had still half of the questionnaire to go. I was due to present it the next day to a local group that I belong to. And so I said, now's the right time to do it on the phone, fill in the rest of it, and then we'll come back to this week's episode of the workshop, recap the rest of what we filled in. And I think, in terms of when we talk to the target client that we're after, an emissary, one of the things we have presented to them all along in our marketing is that every founder has a story, and every organization therefore has one too. Organization, some people are fond of saying, well, organizations are not the same as people. Perhaps so, but you don't have an organization if there's no people in it. That's for sure. And so there is a story, and there have to be, I should say, elements of a story that you plug into what you're doing for the continuity and the perseverance you're going to need, and the ability to cling to a direction that you want to go. Because when you're invested in that, right, it's just like anything else. When people get committed to their beliefs, or committed to the way that their interpretations of things, or committed to their ways of doing things, and they're like, this is the way we've always done it, so that's the way we're always going to do it. You and I were talking about that yesterday. And I think that we should harness that proclivity we have, which is usually directed towards destructive things, and let's channel it towards a positive thing. Because if we have that objective that we can just tirelessly, daily move towards, eventually everything around us is going to bend to our will and say, these guys or this person is not going to give up. So resistance goes and bugs somebody else. So it's a long-winded way of putting it, but there you go.
Well, so we started off last week with the questions. Then you went and presented. So you now, I think, have even more information about how these questions play out and how they're beneficial. So how do you want to dig into this?
Well, we were at the point last week, I want to say, that we move towards, I'm going to move towards like the second half of the questionnaire, because this all has to do with how we respond to the needs of our target client, with an understanding of who they are, their psychological makeup, their weaknesses and their fears and their concerns. We discussed all of that, but now the other part of it begins to fill in the gaps of how we answer that. And so I think a good place to start is to say, the question goes, how do you demonstrate your unique genius to your ideal customer through empathy and expertise?
Empathy and expertise.
And just to sort of kickstart that, I'll say that one of the things I heard you say last week, which I think communicates a tremendous degree of empathy. I think I have not met any authors we've worked with, and including several people who've ended up passing on working with us, who did not appreciate the fact that we tell the truth without fear or hesitation as we see it. Right? That's one example of empathy, is saying, let's just be honest about what publishing is and what it isn't, what writing a book is and what it isn't, what most people do versus what successful people do, right? And we never sugarcoat that, and we never try to tell people, oh yeah, we make you a best-selling author, it's going to be great, you're going to make millions of dollars just by writing a book. We don't do that.
Yeah. If I were to think of empathy, what comes to my mind is a deeper understanding and appreciation for that individual as a human. Because empathy, to me, plays itself out when someone is looking to, perhaps someone is stuck or struggling. That's when I think empathy really comes to the forefront. When somebody is firing on all cylinders, everything's great, I think that people don't generally think of empathy. And so to your point of telling people what we believe the truth to be about their situation, is practicing empathy because, and it has to be combined, I think, with expertise and experience, in that, how do I phrase this? It recalls to my mind when I started doing advisory work probably a decade ago, maybe. I had sold a company, retired for a little bit, started doing some other things, started watching some other ventures, and got into advisory work. Part of that advisory work was telling people how I thought their ends could be best met. What means do we employ to achieve their ends? And I had a couple come in to talk about how to grow their business. And during the course of that conversation, the conversation turned to what they wanted out of life. And it was pretty clear that they were not implementing or executing on their life goals. And they were delaying those. In this case, the guy felt the business wasn't in a good enough condition to support a family, and the lady was getting tired of not having a family. And so I said, well, the real problem here is that you guys have a disconnect in what the priorities are. And if we as a business don't have empathy for that, let's say me as an advisor and the handful of people that I had working with me, if I didn't have empathy for them as an individual, I would solve for the wrong problem. The wrong problem, as they even presented initially, was, well, we need to grow the business. I don't know that that's factually true. You may think it is, but that's the trouble was they were solving the easy to solve problem. Well, of course you can grow the business. That's easy. There are lots of ways to do it. Figuring out how to have the conversations about when you're going to start your family, that is a difficult conversation that nobody wants to have. Even when you have to have it, you don't want to have it. So I practice some empathy in that situation by helping them go into those deep, deep waters.
Yeah.
Facilitating the conversation. And I assured them, well, of course we can grow your business, but we're not going to do that yet because you have a higher priority to solve for. Once you solve for that higher priority, in this case, when are you going to start your family? Now that impacts everything else down the line.
Sure.
So they came back a week later and I said, so what do you think? The homework was, when are you going to start your family? And she's, hey, within a year. Cool. Great. Now I have a deadline to get your business in order. And that, I think, was expertise, experience, and empathy. Expertise without experience is like someone who's book smart, but with no life experience. Like, yeah, the books don't really work out the way they purport to. That might be an ideal, but you don't get the ideal very often. Experience would tell you, the expertise that you have, which is growing a business. This isn't going to solve a decade from now. It's not going to solve the problem. The real problem is the family issue. Now, the empathy part is these people are humans, real worries, real concerns, real dinner tables that they have to sit at, real holidays they have to go to, awkward conversations they have to have that nobody wants to have. They want to solve for the easier problem.
Yeah.
But I think relying on expertise, experience, and I'm just adding that to the question that this group has asked, and then empathy comes together. And so for emissary, helping a person see that you don't really want to write a book necessarily. You want to communicate a message, and you think that the book might be the vehicle to do that.
Yes.
That is having empathy for the person, helping them count the cost before they get into the middle of this thing and then realize, wow, that wasn't what I wanted to do, or it's not going to achieve the ends. That is, I think that's operating with empathy rather than empathy for the human, rather than, hey, we'd like to make a sale. We'd love to help you write your book. That might all be true, but that's second priority to you as an individual.
I think that just as an add-on to that, I was trying to explain to my 15-year-old son the other day, who is pretty convinced that a sizable percentage of his behavior is just fine because it doesn't affect anybody else. And I had to redraw the boundaries for him and explain, it always affects somebody else, son. And it's no different if you're deciding you want to be an author and carry a message, which is why it works for so few people, because so few people really understand what is the magnitude of the impact of the decision I'm about to make. How much does it, like, I've made that decision before, and I was lured by the whole bestseller idea. And I thought, if I'm a best-selling author, people are going to be knocking on my door, and we've talked about that a little bit. If you build it, they won't come. And then I realized what was the real impact of what I'd done. I'd blown a large amount of money on a very expensive book that nobody cared about. Nobody read. My phone didn't ring. My email didn't blow up. Nobody came asking me to speak on their stage or be on their podcast. I had to do all of that myself, and I had to do it with a message that I hadn't really thought through. Is this the message I want to get behind that is so important that I can't shut up about it? So, personal experience, yeah. And therefore, do I have empathy for the person coming in saying, "I want to write a book"? Yeah, I know the lure. Now let's talk about what's attached to that lure. What are you signing yourself up for? So I like that. But I thought, the question was both around empathy and expertise. And one of the other things that I think we have become really good at, you were instrumental in this because you handle the majority of it. And that is that for expertise, we're not just publishing a book because you have one. So if you're going to go down our path, there's a strategy part to that. And we do not proceed if there is no strategy. And now you might have a book that has a strategically marketable message built into it. You may have, right? Like some of our authors have that when they come to us. We don't need to spend a lot of time on strategy with them because they and we together can easily get to the root of what that is. But either way, whether they have it when they show up or they don't have it when they show up, we don't proceed to hitting publish until we have one.
Yeah. And to your point about strategy, sometimes strategy is an excuse for not knowing what to do. Actually, here's why I say that. I hired a PR lady who had worked in PR. I had her as an account executive some years ago. And I think, if I recall, it was something like, we basically just need a copy written for a product page, and we need social media posts to be put out about that product page. And she kept saying, well, we need a strategy. We need a strategy. We need a strategy. I was like, no, we don't. We need you to write a post that says this product exists. And then we need to write some more posts about, various features and benefits. Number one, because all of the time, the weeks and who knows, months of you wanting to put together strategy, we could have written hundreds of social posts. So your strategy was your pushing on strategy is a delay that you just, as I see it, you just don't want to write posts. You think there's some magical thing to social media. Social media is about visibility. It's about awareness. You could say almost anything on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And number one, it's transient in nature. Nobody's going to remember it 6 hours from now. And yes, well, I was saying that because sometimes I'm like, hey, you've seen this post. But it's a nobody will do business with you until they know you're there, which is why there are people paid reasonably good money to stand on a street corner and spin a sign that says car wash over here or hot dogs over here.
Liberty
because it works. Ironically, it works. Now, I can tell you the strategy behind that was there are people driving by. We need to tell them that we exist. All right. Pick anything.
Yeah.
Absolutely anything. Try it. And so the idea, I pushed back on her, and then, she would sort of argue it with me. Like, no, we actually just need activity in this area. We'll see what sticks. Now, that is as opposed to, I was working with a company that manufactured products for water mitigation. If your house is flooded, they've got dehumidifiers and air movers and all sorts of stuff, all internet connected. And they had hired me on to develop the ecosystem. We've got all these data points out there. How we were collecting the data, we don't know what to do with it. We've got insurance companies, and we've got dealers, and we've got consumers, and we've got us who wants to sell stuff. We've got all of these stakeholders. Where's the value here? What do people care about? How do they buy it? What data do we sell? What data do we keep private? What data do we, give away for free? How does this app integrate with this other stuff? I was the outside consultant to bring in to develop this ecosystem. How do you make it kind of like Apple, right? So if you use an Apple laptop and you use an iPhone, you can get iMessage on both of them. That was strategic.
Yeah.
The strategy, the strategic component or the plan, for that took time. It took a lot of conversations. What do people care about? It took voice of the customer, calling up people who were potentially going to use the software. Where's the value in this? How do you, if you've got 1,000 of these items on a truck someplace, how would you manage, from an app, which device you're talking to? And collecting a ton of data, because if you're going to develop a product, all the resources that go into developing that product and then bringing it to market is sometimes years, sometimes hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars to bring that product to market. And then if you had to rework it at that point in time, somebody else is just screaming up behind you, and now the game is lost. So I look at that strategy, even the word strategy, and pull out. Sometimes strategy is overhyped. Sometimes it's absolutely 100% necessary. And now here's why I tie this in with the books and the strategic components of books. if you have a message that you want to tell people, I think there are two major parts of it. There's the for me and the for thee. The for me, I'll think of my own, the first book I published. A lot of this content was for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to determine what was for thee. Well, if I had to tell you something, what was important for you sort of universally to my audience that is, what do I withhold essentially? And then sometimes these things that I take for granted that I'm like, well, of course this makes sense, right? I might gloss over that. I might overlook that as being so vitally important that I bring that to the forefront. And so I put it out there. I had to go through a bit of strategy. In my case, it was, talking with people, doing a bit of research, talking with you, getting input, allowing other people to amplify certain areas that I had maybe glossed over and needed to unpack a little bit. So I think when we write books, there has to be some sort of thought put into, I want to say these things, but the reader needs to hear these things, and and where they overlap in that Venn diagram is something I really need to critically focus on. And that's why those are my thoughts on strategy. I think that's why it's important for books. And I think that sometimes people overhype strategy because they just don't want to get going, or are afraid to get going and say anything.
Yep.
And sometimes they don't put in enough thought. They don't talk to enough people, and they launch products or services or messages that no one cares about. Because all you had to do was ask a handful of questions and find out you're the only one who cares. That was all for me, and none of it was for thee. Therefore, you don't want to buy.
And that goes back to knowing the right questions to ask, which, frankly, a lot of authors don't. A lot of authors are first-time authors, or they might have even written books before, and they didn't really go anywhere, and they never really got the answers as to why. They didn't know how to examine the corpse of their previous failures, so it was an ineffective autopsy, and the cause of death was not determined. And then we come along and we say, okay, so how does this carry forward to this part of spreading the message? And all of a sudden they go, I hadn't even thought about that. I didn't even know I was supposed to ask it. And I'm like, exactly. That's part of what you're paying us for, is knowing, the old story about the guy who fixed the machine and wrote an invoice for $10,000, $50 to turn the lever, $9,500 to know, to figure out what was wrong with it. The other two things that I put in here were very much follow the first two, right? They flow from it. And I think this speaks to strategy and then execution in the right order, because the other two were make the complex simple and understandable. We've got a couple of authors who tell us all the time, I can't believe how you guys just educate me, and so simply what was like a complete mystery or a blur or wasn't even on my radar is now incorporated into my thought process. So, if, for example, Ron Daniels has said that many times, because we figured out pretty early that doing Barnes & Noble launches wasn't a good idea for him. Why? Because on any given day, 99% of people going into a Barnes & Noble don't give a rip about rose gardens. And his book is about roses. So we said, okay, scratch that. We've tried it, got a little bit of success. Okay, fine, good. But what we really want to do is have you showing up and teaching at American Rose Society meetings and rose and garden related events. Why? Because that's fully your target clients. And then every time he goes there, he sells 25 books here, 35 books here, 50 books here, right? Easy as pie. And he's loving it. He's having the time of his life. And so making the complex simple and understandable, and then over delivering and over communicating. And I don't say over communicate in a bad way. I say communicate at a level that any reasonable person would expect, journeying through a multifaceted, multi-layered, complex process that requires a lot of things to be done at the right time.
Well, here's a good for instance of that. And the thing that comes to my mind is the idea of overcommunication. Is maybe overcommunication is a misnomer, because I think there sometimes is overcommunication.
Sure.
But what we're talking about in this idea of overcommunication is don't assume that the other person has the information that you have. So for instance, I do some layouts for books. So if you look at a book, sometimes that the first paragraph, each paragraph might be indented, let's say 1/4 of an inch or something like that, right at the start of the paragraph. That's not a tab. That is not a tab character. Do not put tab characters in the manuscript. Some people put tab characters all over the manuscript. You know what the first thing is I'm going to do? I'm going to remove them all. Because there is a style, there's what's called a style sheet, which operates on that type of text, the body text, right? We define it as body, and now I can create all sorts of styles. I can say every time there's a paragraph, here's what space is after it, and then you indent the next one. I can make certain decisions, like I always want a paragraph to be full on a page. I want to keep this paragraph with the next paragraph. I can make all those stylistic considerations which operate on hundreds of pages of text with one button. But if you got tab characters all over the place, I have to go back and remove them all.
Yeah.
Now, a person who is used to a word processor back in the day when we did this, right? When we all started typing on word processors, there wasn't a thing called a style sheet.
Yeah.
Didn't exist. You would tab to type, click tab, right? You had the line feed, you had a line, right? And that sort of technology and process, not everybody is privy to. So to speak to an author and say, hey, when you send your manuscript, make sure that it's formatted this way, might seem remedial. It might feel like over communication.
No.
However, that clarity is there to inform a person of the things they might not know, which have a domino effect of time and effort down the line. Or like changes that have to happen to a manuscript or to a design or something like that. Not every change is going to be made at every time in a new document sent, because every time you open that file and do something, don't do onesie twosies, because every change you make might ripple into something else.
Yeah.
And it's super duper inefficient. So, setting those expectations with an author might feel like over communicating, but I think it's necessary communication, because they don't know the ins and outs of all of these processes and the complications, because all they're seeing is, well, hell, what does it take to get words on a page? It must not take much to get words on a page. Like,
I can hit the tab button.
It's more complicated than you think.
Yeah.
Especially now that you have multiple files too, right? You got a paperback file, you got a hardcover file, you got an EPUB file, you got a PDF file, right?
Oh, that's easy. Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Well, anyway, so that's how we demonstrate the unique genius. And I'm getting the sense we may turn this into a multi-part series here, because it's fascinating to discuss, and I think it's great for the audience. But we've got plenty of questions left, so I'm going to dive to the next one, which is, how do you describe your process that enables your ideal customer to acquire your offering? And I'll just read off the bullets real quick and then get your reaction, right? So the things that I remembered that I wrote down were: strategy comes first, and the client must be part of that and approve it. Then I put drafting and editing is collaborative. Reviews are mandatory. Don't come to me and say, write me a manuscript and I'll see you in 6 months. Not going to happen. Not going to do it. Another one, only promoters fit the avatar. We don't do passive authors. And then fees come in phases and are performance-based. And so we like to tell people, right, this is an investment. It's like buying a car in terms of its size and complexity. But you are still subject to human nature and factors changing and things we didn't see coming. And so we do it in phases. If we get to the end of the strategy part and you are like gung-ho ready to proceed and you love us, then we execute with the remainder of our fees. If you get to that point and things have changed and you suddenly realize I can't go through with this, thanks guys, I got to go. We say no more about it. And if you get to that point and you hate our guts and you think these guys are idiots, they don't know what they're doing, then you're out considerably less money than you would be if you got to a halfway point of a manuscript you didn't really want to do, or, you paid a bunch of money up front, way more than you needed to up front. So there's my thoughts of, those are parts of the process that enable the customer to acquire our offering.
One of the thoughts that comes to my mind is the idea of building a house, right? You don't just embark on building a house out of the vision in your mind. Yep. Some people do. You can see them on YouTube. But typically, my headphones are dead. Yeah. Typically what we find is that you go through a permitting process based on some sort of drawings. So you have a architect take whatever vision you have in your mind, they put that down on paper. And then there's a series of steps that are followed through to say, hey, can you actually do that with the resources that you have? And then you can begin building. Yep. Now, those steps are in place because wouldn't it be ridiculous if all of us, let's say me, I want to, build a house in the woods or something like that. And I'm like, never, of course I can do this. Wouldn't it be ridiculous if everybody did that? Yep. We all built with just the vision in our mind and then embarked on, a trip to the Home Depot. The process of this, the phased process is important because you need to know whether you're building a tiny home or you're building a ranch style home or a ranch style with a basement. Mm-hmm. Whether you can build a basement on that ground or not. Then you can have a second story. Do you need a garage or a carport? Where are you going to put your HVAC equipment? How's your plumbing going to go into this thing? Where are you going to run your electrical? Where does your electric even come from? Where are you going to get your water? All of these processes in building a home, we sort of take for granted because we think, well, it is ridiculous to think we're just going to, take a trip to the Home Depot and build a home. The vast majority of us would not. However, when it comes to, let's say in this case of Emissary, writing a book, well, what dummy can't get on, Google Docs and start writing a book? Of course I can.
Yeah.
The challenge with that is that it's let's say it's a year-long process, 8 months to a year, let's say. That year-long process is going to go quickly, but a lot can happen in 8 months, in 12 months. And we got to know, what do we want to end up with? Where does this book fit into your world? And it's better to phase that out so that you have a plan. Like in the case of Emissary, we have a plan for what this book is going to be and how it works into your business and what the core message is. Maybe what the working title is going to be and who's going to read this, which is going to very much inform what you're going to say and how you're going to say it in your manuscript.
Yeah.
Also, how are you going to bring this to market? Because like we've talked about before, writing a book is kind of like building a home in the middle of a forest. No one cares. You are one of 8 billion people on the planet. and one of millions of people who are writing books at any given time. So how are you going to get through the noise to let people even know you exist and they should come out and view your stuff? All of that has to happen as part of a plan. Otherwise, too often what happens is you write a book, get to the end, you're like, yay, it's published. Nobody buys it. And then you're like, maybe I should start promoting it. Well, now it's super late.
A little late.
You're really late to the game. So that's in it. And I don't want to, you brought up this idea, Barnes and Noble launch. That might not work for everybody.
Yeah.
Might not work for the vast majority of people, but can you experiment with it? For sure.
Of course.
A strategy is a direction. Things are going to change. And if you take it in bite-sized chunks, you can more easily deal with those changes when they arise. Because again, a year's going to go fast, but a lot can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking of the term feasibility study as you spelled all that out, because that's what a lot of, especially when you get to industrial level construction projects, large commercial industrial properties that are built, to think about like when Tesla builds a factory, right? You don't just go and, let's just start building our factory here. It's a big flat open piece of land, right? No, you have to conduct a feasibility study. Say, is this the right kind of foundation on which to build? Are there natural resource considerations? Is it easy enough to access all the city utilities? Can we, is this in the right zone for all of the fiber optic level of connection we're going to expect? And a lot of that is self-evident probably to these people. And that's why they're able to do it so much faster than they used to. But that's because the research has been done and the process has been documented and the knowledge is there. It's easy enough to tap into. But even so, they still do a feasibility study. They don't just, okay, well, let's go. We know it worked over here in Texas, so let's now try it in Oklahoma. It's not necessarily going to work. So you do all that thinking up front. And I think that's, when I mentioned that the avatar must be a promoter, I don't know if promoter is the right word. I'm actually, for the words guy, I'm wrestling for the word, but it has to be somebody who has the fortitude to work through that process, because it can take some time.
Yeah, I don't think promoter is I know where you're headed with that idea of promoter. Before we get to that, I want to touch on something about avatar and explode the idea also out for other businesses. If you look at how warehouses are built versus how retail is built, warehouses are holding grounds for products in transit, right? So think about where your manufacturing is, think about where your end, delivery is to a retailer or to an end user. A warehouse can't be too far from the manufacturer, can't be too far from the end user. You might build a warehouse, it's seemingly in the middle of nowhere, but it's not, because it's easy for the manufacturers, it's easy for the retailers, right? So you typically end up with transit hubs. And there's other ways to do it, but retailers don't do necessarily the same thing. Retailers, what might look where some of the larger retailers, right, with deep investments in statistical analysis, they might figure out, well, there's going to be a population growth in this area, so we're going to stick our retail outlet here. And a lot of times what you find is a bunch of national chains all of a sudden rush in, and all of a sudden you get, the TJ Maxx next to the Marshalls, next to the
other strip mall,
Kohl's next to this, next to that, all in a strip mall. You're like, where did all these people come from? How did they all decide on the same place? They actually all followed one or two of the majors, because the avatar, the customer that we're looking for, we already know they shop at those other places. So we're just going to stick our retail store right next to theirs.
Oh yeah, you see that with like Walgreens every time. every time a Walgreens goes up, CVS is not far behind, right? Or Rite Aid. There's going to be one kitty corner sometimes. They're like really right across from each other.
Or McDonald's. One of the core elements of McDonald's strategy is that you get reasonable quality food fast.
Yeah.
You get there fast, you get out fast, which is why there's so many McDonald's everywhere, right?
Yep.
And that's the strategy is not a whole plan. That's the other thing about strategy and planning, right? Strategy is sort of an end state, an end desire.
Mm-hmm.
We want you to get a reasonable quality burger. Like, let's say, well, we get you a good burger fast. Boom, done. Now, how do we do that? Well, that's a plan.
Yeah.
Strategy is something different. Now to the promoter idea. I think of promoters, the word feels loaded to me. And this is, I think, why the word isn't quite working.
Yeah.
The word feels loaded because to me, the promoter personality is one of extroversion.
Yeah.
Like, you're just going to, I walk in the room and boom, I'm the life of the party because, hey, we're going to have a promoter. We're promoting. But that's not true of all the authors, right?
No.
We think of, let's say, a Sam Feeney with his Sam Feeney's Career Factors, or Corey Sexton, What's Your Church Needs You. I wouldn't look at either one of those people and say, boy, you're just going to spin yourself silly on social media, making a bunch of videos, talking about your stuff all the time. But each one of them has a message that they're going to communicate that message, whether you help them or not.
Yeah.
Now, I think of that. There's an old saying that I've sort of lived by, which is, it's easier to direct a person than get them going.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lazy person, don't hire lazy. Doesn't matter how much you train them, they're going to show up to work lazy. However, if they're going to do the work anyhow, years ago, I hired a guy to do product management and talked to him about his, just generally what he does with his life. And he's like, yeah, I build spreadsheets for this and I build spreadsheets for that. And I was like, really? In your personal life? Yeah, absolutely. I build spreadsheets. Oh yeah. Tell me about such and such. Well, my mom was an English major, so English is really important to me. And we were always being corrected, yada, yada. All of the disciplines that we needed him to do from a work standpoint, he already did in his personal life. Well, great. I can train you how to direct all of that into something that's valuable for the organization. Same is true for an author who is already going to communicate the message. They don't need us, but we can help amplify them.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's promoter, but if you give them an opportunity, they're going to take it. I don't know what word to wrap around that idea. But if you already have if you have a message that you're going to talk about anyhow, emissary can help you amplify that. And if we give you a stage, will you show up and communicate your message? If there's if the person's like, no, I don't really want to do that, I just want to write my book. It's like, okay, well, maybe that's a thing. But it's not.
I've talked with a couple people like that before. I'm remembering now. We've had people say, well, I want to write a book. Well, do you want to be on stage? No, not really.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, I don't really want to do podcasts. I don't really want to do interviews. I really don't want to travel and speak. I'd really just like, well, then I don't know how to help you, because it sounds terrible, but nobody cares that you exist outside of your tiny little circle, which is not being disparaging to anybody. It's like, nobody cares that I exist outside of the people that I might make an effort to have know me. And even then they might not like me, but that promoter personality, it'd be great to have a promoter, but I think sometimes promoters can't slow down enough to consider their own thoughts.
Yeah. And it's, I agree. The promoter word is probably a part of what we're talking about there, but and I thought about, messenger. Yeah. But, it's that person who, like you said, they're going to go around saying that, and telling and sharing it with people, whether you help them or not.
On a very biblical level, and this is not a spiritual conversation, but on a biblical level, the corollary is prophet.
Yeah, the spokesman for. Yeah.
I have a message. I'm going to share it. You don't have to listen,
Yeah.
but I'm going to share it. And that I think is prophet's a very loaded term because it's so spiritual, but I think people don't give them. Yeah, exactly. I have a word from, got to be
God
careful.
told me to tell you, by golly.
Exactly. God told me you should drink less coffee. It's like, I don't know. Maybe your social interaction said you should. But I think, for prophet, there might be a different term, but prophet is the closest one I can think of.
Spokesman, right? You have a White House spokesman. You have a spokesman for this company, or a spokeswoman, or whatever, spokesperson. But think about that, because a spokesperson is paid to their purpose, the whole reason that job exists. If they're not delivering your message, they're not doing their job, and you fire them. And so I'm not set on that term, but I like that, because it's sort of, in my mind, it says, okay, it's like when a politician hires a spokesman, right? That spokesman, every day when they do their job, they stand in front of the press and they tell the press what that politician is thinking, saying, writing about, believes, etc. And if they're not doing that, they have no reason to talk.
Yeah, I liked where you're headed with that. Another word that comes to my mind is sage. The reason sage comes to my mind is that for emissary's tagline is, we tell the stories that matter. Not every story matters.
Yeah.
In the same priority as another story,
or in the same moment.
Right.
So one moment to the next.
Yeah. So like, if you want to talk about your new burger joint, okay, that's not an emissary project.
No.
And why it's not an emissary project is, well, anybody can help you. So you talked about your burger joint. But a sage has considered that these are the things worth considering.
Yeah.
They go through that process, that filtering process in their own mind. Like, today I'm going to think about things today. I'm going to think about things and I'm going to consider them. But first I consider what's worth considering. And then after I've considered it, I've come to some conclusions, which now I need to tell you about, because I've determined that this matters.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something to that commonality with the authors that we work with, that they've determined that message really matters. And it matters beyond whether people buy their book or they don't.
Yeah.
A spokesperson, right? It's like some people will be like, hey, I want to sell 1 million copies. It's like, okay, maybe that's a good goal. And I don't want to discourage anybody, but I think what commonality with emissary authors is that they have a message that matters to the people who they believe. It's almost like, I'm going to say this because I've determined it really matters. And if people listen, they listen. If they don't, they don't.
That's on them. Yeah.
And that I think is a defining characteristic of emissary publishing and an emissary author.
I was going to share this. I know we're starting to dwindle on time here, so we're going to have to push to episode 3. But I wanted to share this. I've wanted for a long time to write a book just for young Judeo-Christian men, late teens, early 20s, maybe into early 30s. And I've been dictating chapters on my handy-dandy Apple Notes app. And these are some of the subjects I've come up with. And they're going to sound a little vague if you don't, so you have to read the chapters, but these are just the working titles I've come up with for the sections, right? So one of them is called prayers for which the only answer is yes. Right? I believe there are prayers you can pray that God is going to say yes to that. They're not the prayers most people pray, but they do exist and you can pray them, right? Another one is called accept no substitutes. Right? This is a clarion call to young men to beware of what our seductive and seditious culture attempts to get them to think are plausible alternatives to what God has commanded. Here's another one. Know the value, not just the price, right? Young people know the price of a lot of things. They know the value of very few things. Here's another one. Stand up for your responsibilities instead of your rights. And so when you were talking about the sage knowing what messages need to, what details, what messages, what components, what core ideas really need to be out there versus ones that are very much kiddie pool by comparison. I was like, yep, I've been slowly in the back channels, just in my spare time, not doing anything with it yet, but I've just been slowly drafting, but dictating, my thoughts, my stories, my recollections, and forcing them to collide with these principles that don't change no matter what stage of history you've lived at, what country you've lived in, what language you speak, what religion you follow, what anything like that. These things do not change. Every culture that has ever that has ever existed, every civilization that has ever existed has had people who know the price of things but not the value. Everyone has had people who accept cheap substitutes for the real thing. Everyone has had people who, what was that first one? I hit it out of my brain as quickly as I said it. Everyone has had people who pray, who the only thing they know how to pray is gimme, gimme, gimme. Right? And does God answer those prayers? Sometimes he does. For the most part, he's like, okay, still waiting. Because that's not what this is about, right? It's not Santa Claus. There are prayers you can ask that God absolutely will say yes to. And he'll say yes to it the first time. You won't have to wait. But 99.9999% of people don't pray them. So they don't get the answer. And that's what I'm looking at those and I'm saying those are perfect examples of what a young man really needs to hear. How do I know that? Because I was once a young man who needed to hear it and nobody told me. I had to go through a painful process of finding it out. So am I hoping to spare any young man pain? Only unnecessary pain. The pain that's necessary for the growth of his character, I want it for him. But that's a whole separate subject. The main thing I'm trying to do here is forewarn a younger generation of what I was not forewarned of. Because every generation that has ever lived knows things that its successors do not. That itself is an unchanging reality. And so when you tap into those unchanging realities, then you're taking on the mindset of a sage. And I think with some of the new authors that we're about to work with here, right? We've got our first lady author coming on board, and she's really dug into this for the book that she's planning to write. She has really banged her head against the wall a number of times. And now she's going to attempt to forewarn other people. And I think that's a really fine example of what you're talking about.
Yeah. And that's why, back to the first question that you asked, I added experience to that list of expertise and empathy, because experience tempers the expertise and the empathy. And that's why you can speak to a 20-something-year-old about relationships, perhaps, and you will get wildly different answers than if you speak to a 80-year-old.
Yeah.
And it's not that the 20-year-old doesn't know what they're talking about, but they've seen so little.
Yeah.
And so the answers are different, because that tempering process hardens the things that need to be hardened. And part of that tempering process is a heat and cool cycle, which I equate to your, the unnecessary struggle. Struggle is necessary. It develops strength, and just like the tempering process, and without that, you get something that's not strong. So, yeah, I think the sage is a good. I'm biased for sure, because I love a good sage. I love a good sage conversation.
Yeah.
I shy away from, I was having a Sunday afternoon get together the other day. And, part of the conversation was like, I cannot participate in this conversation. It was shallow, and in my view, it's just like, these are things not worth discussing.
Vacuous.
I was just like, there's no part of this intrigues me. I have nothing to add, but, and it's not that it's valueless, right? But I have nothing to add.
It's a small story. So it's a lot of people have to go through life living a small story. That's okay.
It's like talking about
I'm not
football.
looking down on them. It's just, that's not why I swim in the deep end.
Yeah. It's like talking about football. Like, I don't know. Probably half of it's rigged anyhow. And it's all for advertising. Like, that's why this exists. So, it's kind of like, well, how should they have played better? They should have caught more, and they should have kicked further. They should have run faster. They should have not gotten hit. Right? How many times can you slice that? Same answer comes out. However,
tried it.
Right. However, right after this conversation, there's, one of these ladies comes out, the lady who was there just like, she's talking about her husband. And all of a sudden we are on a relationship conversation. And I'm like, well, here's, she's like, I'd like to get your thoughts on such and such. And I was like, okay. And all of a sudden we embarked on an hour plus conversation about she and her husband and their relationship. And I gave them some, just some things that I am aware of over the years. And they're much younger than me, together much shorter than me in my, the years that I've been in relationship. And the things that she thought were important, in her view, I was like, well, maybe consider this over here, and just opened her eyes to things that she, would not have been exposed to probably otherwise.
No.
And, they're not earth shattering things, but she didn't know. And now she does. Great. Now do something with it. But that was part expertise, part experience, part empathy, and being a sage, staying out of the conversations that, like, I can't wait. It does not compute. My brain cannot bring up anything of value, for a different conversation, but I'd be happy to talk about this one.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand it. It's English, and I've lived through that, and I've attempted to remain there, and some people can. Again, that's totally fine. Not everybody is meant to be the way you and I are. If there were no different types of people, this would be a very boring place.
Well, it does take every kind of person, and I don't want to discourage. So I guess, as we're winding this down, I don't want to discourage people from thinking that the thing that they're doing or want to do is not valuable.
Mhm.
Just because, let's say, you and I sit on this video call and, we're calling people to a higher, a message that really matters.
We're
What? I'm 46 years old. It took me a long time to settle into some of the things I'm settled into now. And I fully expect them to change in the next 20 years. Because if I look back on the previous 20 something years of work in business, I've done a lot of stuff. And I did it just because I wanted to do it. And I thought it was fun. Okay, cool. I still do things that I want to do and I think are fun. Now, though, I'm a little bit more, I just am a little bit more selective, and I like to ruminate on things. That was, there are some people who are happy. Like my parents own a trucking company and a warehousing company. And there are some folks who work there who are happy as a clam to get up that day, get all the boxes out of that warehouse that need to be out and all the boxes into the warehouse that need to be in, and then close the door and go home. Mm-hmm. And that is a successful and meaningful day. To me, that is not. I need something more. Now, if somebody wasn't happy about making sure all the boxes went in the warehouse and all the boxes get out of the warehouse, people like me wouldn't have stuff.
And imagine if they put you or I in charge of that, right? It would never get done.
I'd tire of it pretty quickly while I sit in the boardroom and whiteboard how we're going to get more boxes and we're going to, do it with fewer people and put more warehouses up, because that's just where my brain is at. Yep. That's what lights me on fire. That is very confusing for some people. Just the same way that other things are very confusing for me. We need everybody plays a part. So, I would just end that with, play the part that you think you want to play and play it well, and be open to change. If you find out that something's not working.
And there's plenty of fish in the sea. So if you want to write a book about your burger joint, there are publishing companies that will help you with that. And they may even make it a success. And if they do, we're happy for you. We don't say this resentfully or looking down our nose as well. As petty people, right? We're just describing our organizational story in the hope that people watching and listening hear and they say, oh, this is the degree of depth I have to go to figure out the origin story of my organization or the company I want to create or the business I want to start. I have to think through these details as opposed to just rushing out there and doing it, because so often that's why 80% or more of businesses fail.
At some point in time, there's nothing quite like the energy of just getting started and doing something. That will take you just so far.
Yep.
And you might introduce a lot of error into the process that you didn't have to. It's unnecessary error. And maybe that is necessary for your journey. And that's different. That's time for a different topic or a different conversation. Topic for a different conversation.
But success is it's a marathon, not a sprint. And marathon runners have to learn to eliminate unforced errors, to borrow a baseball term. Otherwise, they'll never make it.
Boy, we could, this goes into, you remember that book we're writing, Don't Go It Alone.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of marathon, I'm glad you bring that up, because there's something about marathons. A feature of marathons is that there are pacers. There are people who are paid to pace the runner who is actually running that marathon. Yep. And that pacer keeps that runner on target for a certain time. So they can tell and the pacers are so good at what they do that if you said, I want to keep a 5:30 mile or something like that, that pacer knows that pace.
Yeah.
Like hands down. And they travel around the world getting paid to pace runners on their races. Now, that I think there's a lot to be learned from that. When you're running a marathon, you're not running it alone. In business, you are not alone, no matter how much you think you are. You're not alone. And sometimes you would do well to find somebody who knows it really, really well. Find the expert and have them pace you.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. Well, this is the Tuesday workshop at Thinker Business Accelerator Community. Glad to have you here, all of our viewers and listeners. I'm Jason Todd. This is Paul Edwards. We're discussing questions that Paul was presented with as part of a business group. They're in the Arizona area, and we're talking about them in the context of emissary publishing, business that Paul and I operate. And I think they're also applicable for every other business that's out there. Whether you're stuck and struggling and you need to get back on track, I think these questions are valuable for you. Make sure you catch the last episode. Also, sounds like we're going to do another episode of this, just because I think they're so meaty. I love these conversations.
Yeah.
And I'd encourage you to make it really personal. If you're struggling with how to make that personal, drop your questions in the chat. Paul or I will get back to you with some answers. And if you would like to be a guest at some point in time, if you've got a message that you think is worth sharing, contact Paul or me at publishwithemissary.com. You can also just write it in any of these, wherever you're seeing this video, just pop it in the chat. We'll find you. And love to have you as a guest here if you want to bat these things around with us as well. Thanks for joining us. All right. I'm just going to end it there. Ta-da, done. Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah.
I was thinking of our buddy, Matt Kinnaman.
Oh, yeah.
You remember him? We were talking to him about a book, but he didn't proceed with us, but he wanted to write a book, and we were pretty close to him doing it with us, called Long May You Run. And he's competed in the Boston Marathon like 13 times. And Casey Elkins, if I could ever get a hold of him, matter of fact, I'm probably going to see him in Nashville this week. I'm going to book Casey Elkins, this guy right here, 18-time Ironman triathlon competitor. We could have him on the Emissary podcast. We could have him to talk about endurance and really unpack that as an analogy for business.
Yep.
So
that's cool. All righty. Well, I'm going to call you back on a different line.
Okay. I've got to run to the bathroom. Give me about 10 minutes.
Sounds good.
Okay. Bye.